So it's not the typical for this channel to be bringing really positive news. And I think that this definitely qualifies. It's one of the only reasons that I'm doing a GrapheneOS video now when I just did one in the last video. The last video was more talking about how it's a good off-ramp for Apple because they're doing this ID verification. You can go watch that. It's completely separate from this one. This one is actually some of the biggest news I've heard in regards to GrapheneOS, I think, in a long time, maybe even ever. But back in October of last year, GrapheneOS posted on X that they'd been working with this mysterious major Android OEM. Nobody really knew who they were talking about. There was tons of speculation, but no one actually knew. So since June of 2025, essentially, they've been doing this to try to build a phone that meets their hardware security requirements, which are pretty, like, the security requirements are no joke. That's why right now the only phones that actually meet those requirements are ironically Pixels, a Google phone. But Graphene wouldn't say who. They wouldn't hint to it. It was just like this major Android OEM. And they had this kind of vague timeline that nobody really was able to pull anything from. They were saying maybe 2026, maybe 27. Yeah, it was just, there was no substance to it whatsoever. And it was really depressing as we're watching a lot of these phones do crap like, ID verification and collection, really. I think, the last video I was saying it's not age verification, it's ID verification, but it's actually ID collection. It's actually even worse than that. Then they get hacked and lose all the IDs. Anyways, but a couple months after they were saying all this, right, in early February, they made another announcement that they were going to make an announcement within the next couple of months. So then on February 27th, someone on Reddit ended up leaking an internal Motorola presentation slide showing GrapheneOS under Motorola's security offerings. Now, the moderators pulled that post really quickly, but the screenshots were pretty much already everywhere, right? You had kind of like the Barbra Streisand effect on a smaller scale with that. And then in March 1st, someone on X asked GrapheneOS what they'd do if Google decided to all of a sudden lock down Pixel bootloaders entirely, and GrapheneOS basically just said, we have an OEM partner. I had someone ask me the same thing. I pointed to a different reason altogether, but whatever. I'm definitely a fan of them having choices in regards to their partners and who they're going to have. But the next day at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, which is basically the biggest annual trade show for the mobile industry, Motorola ended up making it official. They actually announced a long-term partnership with the GrapheneOS Foundation to bring GrapheneOS to a future Motorola smartphone, which should be very interesting. It's going to be pre-installed right out the box. This is probably the biggest thing to happen in mobile privacy in years. Like I said earlier, it's not just the biggest thing for GrapheneOS, but this is a major, major step forward. Them having an alternative besides Google. It's something I'm really excited about the possibilities of this, because having a dedicated phone for GrapheneOS is awesome. And essentially, there's a saying in the backup world that exists where it's like 1 is none and 2 is 1, meaning if you only have one of something, a backup, for example, you effectively have nothing because one failure wipes you out, right? So GrapheneOS has been completely dependent on the Google Pixel hardware. And if Google ever decided, hypothetically, to lock down bootloaders, kind of like Samsung did, that would have been it. I really hope that this is the start of something more, because the more hardware partners that they actually have, the harder it becomes for any single company or government to just flatline the project. That's another thing. Like, GrapheneOS is very dependent on stuff like donations. So you should go donate. If you don't know what GrapheneOS is, it's basically an open source mobile operating system built on Android, which is another open source project. Yeah, I've seen people be like, oh, it's a honeypot. And no, none of those people actually can ever offer up any proof of that. Like I said, it is an open source project, so you can comb through the source code yourself. I tend to find that people who advocate against privacy products tend to be people who don't want you to have privacy. The people who don't want you to have privacy tend to be feds. That's just what it is. It's what I run and what I advocate people run. Now, I've been talking about it on this channel for a while, and the Graphene Foundation is a Canadian nonprofit funded entirely by donations, and they have absolutely no venture capital that's actually behind them and no government money. This isn't like the Tor project where they get millions of dollars and have surpluses of millions of dollars at the end of the year. They do take Bitcoin and Monero donations, and the project has roughly 400,000 active devices based on updated download numbers, which until this Motorola announcement actually happened, every single one of the estimated 400,000 devices that's running GrapheneOS was a Google Pixel, right? And that was the only option that you had if you wanted to run GrapheneOS. You bought the Pixel because Pixels were the only phones on the market with the hardware security features that GrapheneOS actually mandates. And you have to really give it to them that they're completely uncompromising on their security requirements. There are a ton of phone providers that at the end of the day are not only compromising, but are compromised and will sell you down the river for nothing, for advertisement pennies, whereas GrapheneOS won't. And I see them take tons of stuff for this, in the comments in places like X. People are like, oh, it's only available on Google phones, and you're giving Google profit. It's like, you could buy a phone used, and not only that, if you buy it used, it's going to be a lot cheaper. I've seen phones, Pixel devices listed for $200 on Amazon, which I don't, advocate anyone support them either. But GrapheneOS won't compromise on any of their requirements. Basically, they need a Titan M2 security chip or equivalent for the hardware root of trust. Verified boot with user set keys so you can confirm the OS hasn't been tampered with on every single boot. A Weaver token on a secure element for hardware-backed brute force protection that ramps up to 1-day delays between password attempts. Hardware memory tagging, inline disk encryption with wrapped key support, and an unlockable bootloader so you could actually install it in the first place. All of that is why Samsung was never an option. It's why basically no one aside from Google really qualified. When people asked about stuff like Fairphone or whatever, GrapheneOS would say directly, no, those aren't secure devices meeting our requirements. Fairphone lags far behind on support for current Android versions and providing important privacy and security patches. So the fact that Motorola is willing to build a phone that meets all of these requirements really matters, because I think that if companies embrace privacy, they'll do phenomenal. And for years, they've done the complete opposite. They've went in the opposite direction and sold the user out. And it's a really dumb direction to go in because the user is the one who buys the device. The device, reportedly, will use a flagship Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 chip with custom hardware components to support GrapheneOS's hardened kernel and sandboxing. Nothing Motorola currently sells, including their flagship signature phone, can run GrapheneOS. So a new device actually has to be built specifically for it. And they've been working together since June of 2025. And the timeline is probably going to be, according to them, like 2026, late 2026, or early 2027, mainly because Motorola couldn't get all the hardware requirements ready sooner, or so they said. So Motorola also announced two other things at MWC. One is called Private Image Data, which is a new feature in their Moto Secure app that automatically strips metadata from your photos before you share them. Location data, device information, pretty much all of that would be gone before the image even leaves your phone. Now, most people have no idea that their photos are broadcasting their GPS coordinates in a lot of cases every time they send a picture. So having that stripped automatically before you can even share them is a good move. We've seen other devices and device manufacturers do this in the past. I think Motorola is a little bit late to the party, but better late than never, right? Again, moving forward, going towards privacy is an absolute win. And the other is Moto Analytics, which is an enterprise fleet management tool under GrapheneOS ThinkShield ecosystem, which kind of tells you Motorola is really serious about enterprise security in the market. Now, I get sponsored by none of these people. I get money from no one. In fact, the only people that actually send me money is you guys, the people who watch this. And with this video being posted on YouTube, I get ad revenue, but that's from whatever crap they show you. Hopefully you know enough to be able to avoid that. A lot of these people who talk about these products get money from these things. And in my opinion, it's just like, I really can't trust someone who's shilling a product and getting paid for it. That's why, I've had VPNs contact me, oh, you talk about us, and I'm like, good, I'm good. Because at the end of the day, once you do that, you kind of lose a piece of your soul, but more importantly, you lose credibility, and then you end up chasing that constantly. And I'd rather be broke. I'd rather be I'm cool with that. I've been that way for a while. So the GrapheneOS partnership, we get back to that, integrates with ThinkShield too. So businesses that actually need more secure phones will have an actual option beyond the trust Apple, trust Google, both of which to me are not good options, and if you need evidence of that, you just look at, everything that's been happening with them lately. Speaking of that, there's some other stuff that's been happening too. The same week that Motorola was in Barcelona announcing this partnership, Samsung was gutting the recovery menu on Galaxy phones. Their February 2026 security patch stripped out the ability to sideload updates through ADB or SD cards and removed cache partitioning, wiping along with recovery logs completely. And the only options that are really left are rebooting and factory resetting your phone if you have an issue. So Samsung included a notice saying you can't downgrade to older software, quote, due to changes in security policy. And Samsung has said nothing about why. This came after Samsung removed the OEM bootloader unlock toggle entirely from One UI 8 back in July of last year. XDA developers found the bootloader has zero code to unlock itself. It's hard-coded to be locked. So media outlets ended up connecting it to the EU's radio equipment directive, but Google Pixel and OnePlus still allow bootloader unlocking under the same directive. So Samsung essentially is using EU regulation as a cover for a choice that they made completely independently. And there's a whole class action lawsuit that was filed January 27th of this year, basically saying that Samsung's One UI 6.1.1 update permanently bricked Galaxy S22 phones by causing boot loops that overheat the CPU and physically damage the motherboard connections. Samsung allegedly knew about the defect before they pushed the update and didn't offer anything. No free repairs, nothing. And users were quoted around $500 to replace the motherboard on the out-of-warranty device because of this update. So the recovery tools that could have actually helped these people save their phones from, that exact situation are the same tools that Samsung just removed. Tell me that's a coincidence. I don't think it is. And while Samsung is doing all of that, Apple is building identity collection into iOS at the operating system level. And we touched on this in the last video, so I'm not going to hammer it down, but I think that it's important to note because, again, obviously kind of a big phone manufacturer, right? I have another video coming up about Apple too that is also it's disheartening. It's not good. It's not good. Nothing's good. It's all bad, pretty much except for this. So, enjoy this video, guys, because everything else sucks, and that's pretty much the gist of where we're at. Now, the update that with the whole Apple thing, it was like the 26.4 update basically requires people, to submit an ID if they want to be able to use their phone and download apps and crap like that. And I talked, just real quick recap, and I talked about how, the company that collects it, they got owned a bunch of times. So that's what the last video as well. But the amount of stuff that's happening right now is crazy. What happened to GrapheneOS in France, for those of you that were paying attention, kind of shows you really why the Motorola deal matters. Like back in November of last year, a French newspaper published an article that was just a hit piece. They called GrapheneOS a drug trafficker's secret weapon, and the French judicial police raised alarms because some 27-year-old suspect who is a drug trafficker had a Pixel that was running GrapheneOS that allegedly mysteriously reset when they seized it, which destroyed evidence. They're all butthurt about that. But basically, a police analyst described GrapheneOS as a tool enabling users to, quote, exchange money away from justice, which only, would actually make sense if you work for the state and, you're part of that monopoly of violence, which is absolutely what the state is. They claimed that GrapheneOS features a fake Snapchat page designed to deceive investigators, which GrapheneOS confirmed was completely fabricated and made up, and, essentially suggested that the police probably encountered a modified fork similar to the Anam sting that the FBI actually built. Oh, look, a state agency, corrupted an open source project. And then another, state-ran agency quotes the project that was, manipulated and it's insane. And then you had another outlet pile on, spewing more propaganda that, is equivalent to, I think it was the BCN in V for Vendetta. Really, at the end of the day, the newspaper stuff and the propaganda that they faced there was really kind of just the beginning. The head of the cybercrime section of the Paris prosecutor's office warned that the state would not hesitate to prosecute software publishers if links to criminal organizations are found and the developers refuse to cooperate with the justice system. What that means is coercion and extortion. You will do this service for me. You'll do whatever I say, or I will put you in prison, even though you personally have committed no actual crime whatsoever. So, by definition, in my opinion, that state prosecutor is the actual criminal. So, French law enforcement directly compared GrapheneOS to EncroChat and SkyECC, which were two criminal communication networks that were dismantled by European police, or at least they said. Right? He said everyone on there was a criminal. But, it's funny how they didn't have all the arrests. So, for example, EncroChat, right, had 60,000 users and 150 million intercepted conversations. But they didn't have anywhere near that many arrests. Well, if they're all criminals, why not? SkyECC, had like 170,000 users and 3 million daily intercepted messages. Again, nowhere near that amount of people arrested. Not even close. Why not? You know, these were all closed proprietary networks that sold on like what they tried to say was the black market, which is black market is just a free market. Okay. That's all it is. And all of them had stripped down hardware, and they were specifically marketed to criminals, right? And GrapheneOS is free open source software that's downloadable by anyone on the planet. So comparing an open source OS to a, criminal phone networks is kind of insane to me. And GrapheneOS said as much. They said bandits and traffickers also use knives, fast cars, and cash, things that are widely used by honest citizens. And they're right about that. They estimated less than 1% of their users are criminals, which sounds about right for kind of any piece of technology, right? Like if I go rob a bank and I use a car to get there, like, are we going to arrest the CEO of GM? No, we're not. So this is absolutely selective. And then the main reason we're not going to arrest people like that is because they hand over data to the feds, typically without a question. Now, GrapheneOS did a power move, and they pulled their servers out of France, leaving OVH entirely. And they moved update mirrors to sponsors in LA and Miami, and DNS infrastructure to other places like BuyVM and whatnot, and core services to a German provider called Netcup, with long-term plan for physical servers co-located essentially in Toronto. And they were really blunt about it. They said they expect backdoors in encryption and for device access too. Secure devices and services are not going to be allowed. We don't feel safe using OVH for even a static website with servers in Canada or the U.S. via their Canada and U.S. subsidiaries. GrapheneOS developers are reportedly prohibited from working in places like France due to security concerns. This is like, for all those people that are like, GrapheneOS is a honeypot, like this is one of the in my opinion, it's one of the things that tells you that it's really not. The feds hate them. And you can say, well, it's limited hangout. Yeah, but it's open source. Like there's so many things that go against that position that I understand. I advocate not trusting anything, right? 100%. It's always been my stance. Don't trust, verify. But at the same time, if you're like, well, all phones are backdoored. Okay, cool. I get that. I'm not going to argue with anyone on that point. Just like saying all, PCs are backdoored. I wouldn't argue with that either. But what I would say is, if that's your threat level, and that's like, those are concerns for you, that everything is screwed, log off. Dude, log off. Get rid of all your electronics, and that's it. That's an option too. So it's like, you have to, there is a give and a take, in my opinion. And things like GrapheneOS that are open source, I have no issue with because they're open source. And they also do stuff like this. They don't just tolerate it. We don't see they're not complying with authorities left and right. All these other phone companies are. So I see all these simps defending all these other phone companies that are totally screwing people over, monetizing their user base, and no one has an issue with it. Everyone's cool with that, and that's insane. But France, basically, as a country, has been moving in this direction for a long time. France's government is one of the strongest supporters of the nonsensical chat control in the EU, which basically destroys encryption, right? We could do technical talk, but that's what it does. And it pushes for backdoors in both disk encryption and end-to-end messaging. And they promote a French-made messaging app, which is, that's totally safe, which is called Ovid, while simultaneously making false claims about things like Signal to push people towards their real honeypots. And people argue about Signal too. I'm not debating that right now. I'm saying that, that is a honeypot. That's a real honeypot. And GrapheneOS pointed that out, that the whole France-based Android alternatives like the E and, other ones, market as privacy while they have atrocious privacy and security, with E being heavily governmental funded. Like, again, there's an issue there. There's a conflict of interest. France wants tools that they can control, not actual privacy tools. And when there's an actual privacy tool, you know what they do? They threaten to imprison the guy who made it. And that's why, they're like, oh, it's a honeypot. Yeah, I just want to slap him because it's like, you're an idiot. Shut up. When, they run into one that they actually can't control, again, they compare it to criminal infrastructure and start making threats. But you notice when they do that, they don't actually make technical arguments, right? It's just all this kind of emotional language that's nonsense. Anyways, there was also the whole scattered spider incident back in November where someone posted on Dread claiming that feds completely compromised a GrapheneOS phone and that, it belonged to one of the scattered spider members. And GrapheneOS responded and clarified that the phone was actually obtained while it was unlocked, which means, there's nothing any operating system can do to protect you at that point. Like, no level of encryption is going to matter if it's all out in the open and unlocked. So, again, I wonder who that was. Probably definitely not a Fed, right, guys? But they also pointed out that the analysis, or so-called analysis, didn't even confirm that the phone was running GrapheneOS. So it was just like this opportunistic dig that some French Fed did, which is great because at the end of the day, those kind of attacks, when they happen, we can document them, we can talk about them, and now we can be more aware as a community when we have an attack vector, like some Fed posting anonymously that it's a honeypot, or you have some retard YouTuber trying to shill his own phone, which is total garbage, and saying that GrapheneOS is bad. We can start to see through these lies and then call them out as we see them. Think about where GrapheneOS was sitting before this announcement. Governments going after them, media smearing them at the behest of governments, retards commenting nonsense. And I see them when I make a post or a video about it and I post it on X, I'll have people that comment, they're like, it's only available on Pixels. It's like, why? Did you ask why? Did you know what I mean? You're like, oh, you're funding Google. If you buy one, you can buy used. And then there's other people that are like, it's not really private. And none of those idiots actually offer technical explanations. It's like the dipshits who talk about Monero can be traced. It's traceable. It's been cracked. And it's like, oh, okay, they show us evidence. You're an idiot if you don't believe that. Like, what? That's not an argument, dumbass. So it's hilarious watching the cope of stuff like this. Now, nothing's perfect, at the same time. Again, I don't advise anyone trust anything. I do say that things like GrapheneOS, again, are open source, and you can check that out for yourself. Government's going after them, directly threatening them, and, telling them you will cooperate or we will put you in prison. This is something that, to see this deal go down, right, and have, these phone manufacturers that, we're moving in the opposite direction of user freedom, and now we kind of see Motorola walks onto the stage in Barcelona and says they're building a phone specifically for GrapheneOS. GrapheneOS was pixel only. It was a pariah, right? It was dependent on Google continuing to allow stuff like bootloader unlocking, which has no guarantee, right? Given that Google recently restricted things like the Android development in ways that created fairly large hurdles for custom ROM developers. But if Google ever decided to follow Samsung's lead and lock Pixel bootloaders, GrapheneOS would have been in serious trouble, right? And now at least they have some kind of alternative, right? A major OEM building hardware to their specifications. And for them, that's a first. And that's super powerful. And I think we'll see a lot of, unlike a lot of the other, shilled phones that were actual Fed phones, I think we'll see some traction with this. And I think them having a dedicated phone is awesome. So, if you care about having a phone that you can actually control, that doesn't demand that you submit to whatever artificial rules that the real owners, which is the people who update your phone, make. Well, we decided you're going to have to submit ID. Well, we decided, arbitrarily, or, we decided you're not going to be able to access the bootloader. If you don't like that and you want a operating system that is open source and one that you can verify every claim for yourself, you're about to have a second hardware option for the first time ever. So for years, I've been telling people to get a Pixel and install GrapheneOS. And now today, a Pixel 8 is fairly cheap, like $200-250 or something, and GrapheneOS supports it fully. But knowing that a Motorola alternative is coming, built to meet Graphene's hardware requirements with a major manufacturer behind it, I think that, in turn, matters for anyone who takes, not being pimped over their data seriously. Because it's like, I see people, well, I don't care if they sell my data. Okay, do you care if, that company has a data breach and criminals get your data? Do you care about blackmail? All those things are real things that happen. So at the end of the day, it's the issues are bigger than that. And the people who, say they don't care about it really just don't understand the issues. I think that's what they're saying. Essentially, that's what I hear when they say. I want to know what you think about this whole Motorola partnership, because my subscribers tend to be the most intelligent ones that I see on YouTube. When I started this channel, if you look at the comments, there was a whole series that I did where you guys would post questions and that would actually be a video. And I would turn that question into a video. I love that. I'd love to do it again, but there's so much stuff that's happening that I can't even get a moment to breathe to be able to do something like that. But my whole point was you guys are the best, really, at the end of the day. Without compromising yourself or talking about your own operational security too much, I'd like to know what you guys think about this whole Motorola thing. If it's something that, if you have a Pixel, would you consider going the Motorola route? The other thing, there hasn't been a whole bunch of information put out there about this. I'm really excited to see, will they make even more strict requirements? Like, can you harden the phone even more? That should be interesting to see as well. But it'll be interesting to see, how many people this might change plans for. The people that are dead set against Pixel devices, now at least they'll have another option. And while you have Samsung and Apple going the route of, bootlicking the government or locking down their devices to screw you over, you have these other companies that aren't doing that. And that's phenomenal. So stay and enjoy this positive video, guys. You guys know this is not the norm. So this is a major step forward, major win for privacy, major win for privacy here. But stay safe, stay aware. There are adversaries out there. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you guys in the next video.